And then once we've kind of gone back and forth a little bit after that, then we'll just kind of go on to the next question. That's just kind of my thinking.
Okay.
So
Sounds good.
All right.
I think we're on.
live, we are live. All right, great. Hope everyone got that secret conversation we had earlier there. We were live. But anyway, hey, I just want to say thank you everyone for watching the panel discussion today. I want to thank you for tuning in. My name is Greg Pregent. I'm a filmmaker here in Keene, New Hampshire, and I'm joined by Douglas and Laurie Challenger. They're filmmakers, and I know, Douglas, you're a teacher at Franklin Pierce College, but I know you don't live in Rindge. You guys, where do you live?
Well, we live down in near Amherst, Massachusetts, in a town called Belchertown.
Okay.
And
okay, sure.
yeah, used to live in the Monadnock region, but we came down here about 10 years ago.
Okay.
Used to live in Peterborough.
That's right. Yeah. And so today on our panel, I think we're going to be mostly discussing making films, how we work, and just the importance of local documentaries. It doesn't have to be necessarily here in the Monadnock region of Peterborough, just kind of the importance of local documentaries everywhere to record what's going on. And sometimes it's really nice to have a smaller, shorter story. Stories are everywhere. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Also, too, just want to remind folks that you can use the chat if you have any questions for us. And feel free to ask us any questions. Dee is hanging out in the background. She's going to let us know if we have any questions, and we'll be more than happy to answer those for you. So again, thanks everyone for joining us today. I guess let's start out, get my glasses here. I think the first thing is just to ask you guys, and we'll start with you, of a little bit of background of yourselves and just how you got into filmmaking and kind of just where you're at right now.
Great. Well, I just want to thank Dee Fitzgerald and the Monadnock International Film Festival, and you, Greg, for inviting us to be part of this panel.
Thank you. Yeah.
I guess we got started about a dozen years ago in documentary filmmaking. I think we always loved documentary films, and at some point decided to try and make some, ourselves. And the first thing we did was to try and learn as much as we could by going to some places to study documentary filmmaking and video production. And we went to NYU has a program, a summer-long program in video production, documentary filmmaking, and we did that one summer, and went to workshops at Duke University, has a Center for Documentary Studies, and in main media workshops up in Camden, Maine, or Rockport, Maine, I think it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We took classes and then this started working on projects. A
lot of trial and error. Yeah.
And
do you teach film at Franklin Pierce? Or?
Well, I teach. I actually during these 10 years, I started a documentary studies certificate program, okay. And within that program, I do teach intro to documentary studies, and which is sort of a study of documentary filmmaking and different genres and storytelling techniques, and also I occasionally teach media production, but the other professors teach the production for the most part, audio and video production. But I'm a sociologist by training. My PhD is in sociology, and so I teach mostly sociology courses, but have added this in the last 5 or 10 years to my teaching work at Franklin Pierce.
Okay. And Laurie, how did you, you've been interested in film a long time yourself? Have you just kind of been part of the process. And you know, where do you work? Do you work in film? Do you have anything to do with that, or you just kind of help Douglas with his films?
Well, we both share an interest in making films, and we discovered that about 12 years ago, when we started and started taking these courses and learning together. And we realized how much fun we had making them together, and we each bring different strengths to the process, I think. We work well as a team. We do other things, other work as a team as well, running study abroad trips. And so we just work well together. And my background is actually as a musician, and I ran a violin shop in Amherst, Massachusetts for many years, and also have worked as a nurse, although I'm no longer doing that. So I've retired from nursing, and now I'm more focused on the arts, music and filmmaking.
Mhm. And were you, did you guys watch a ton of films, you know, through the years? And is that kind of what inspired you to make films? Or was it just like, was watching films a good pastime and it just kind of turned into making films?
Well, for me, I found myself using documentary films in my teaching at Franklin Pierce in sociology. And I just saw how powerful they were because they emotionally engage people when you're watching them. There's the empathy with the characters and the story is, I found it was just so effective in communicating ideas that otherwise, you know, I'd just be lecturing about, or we'd be reading things or having discussions. So I just saw how powerful the films were in my teaching, and thought, you know, and I've watched them over the years, and I think we both have an artistic side to ourselves, you know. I have been a painter and play music a little bit, and I think documentary filmmaking was a way for me, at least, to bring all these interests of mine, creative interests, together. You know, in a film, you're working with music, you're shooting the picture, and you know, composing that, and then if documentary films, it's kind of analytical. You're doing research, and you're putting a story together. And to me, it puts all these interests and skills together into one art form, and I really enjoy it. Have enjoyed doing what we've done in the last 10 years. Yeah.
I agree. And I think for me, same thing, it brings a lot of my skills together. And even working as a nurse, you are listening to people's stories. You know, I would always be touched by hearing about the lives of the patients that I took care of. And although I didn't do a film on that specifically, or anybody that I took care of, but I just, between that and then the music, I particularly love bringing music into a film, and how you can bring out some emotion just by putting in take one piece of music and then try it, and then try some other completely different kind of music, and it just changes how that moment feels in the film. And I find that to be pretty amazing, what the impact of music can be. So I think my musicianship also plays a role in how we make a film.
Yeah. How about you, Greg? How did you get involved? We all are doing this on top of other full-time work usually, you know.
Yeah, I mean, just like you. I mean, I have a full-time job. I'm for the folks watching, I'm a production director at the Monadnock Broadcasting Group, based out of here in Keene. And so it's called a cluster. So we run 9 radio stations out of one building in Keene. 8 are in Keene, or 7 are in Keene, and 2 over in Brattleboro. And so as the production director, I make commercials more or less for the station. So yeah, I mean, I work 40, 45 hours a week pretty regularly, and I'm busy. Yeah. So, you know, I got involved in film years ago. I had some time on my hand. I was riding my bike a lot, doing a lot of mountain biking, and I was intrigued by GoPros. And I had seen a lot of advertising for GoPros and decided to get one and started experimenting with a GoPro and riding, and then kind of moved on thinking I wanted to do other things besides just making small little videos of me riding on a section of a trail. And that's how kind of it got started. I got a little more ambitious and wanted to maybe get a better camera that would shoot a little better. Of course, GoPros are awesome cameras, and I use those still. But they are limited in the sense, you know, they have a tiny sensor in them. You blow them up too big and they get kind of noisy quickly. And so I realized that I needed a little better camera. And so over the times I experimented more and got a little better equipment. I just had ideas and met some people about films that I wanted to make. And one of the first ones I did was Hidden in Plain Sight, about the homelessness in Keene. And that was really an excellent experience where I really didn't know what I was doing when I made that film. I just was kind of making it. And it was a super learning experience for me. You know, I'm the first one to admit that I went to YouTube University to learn how to become a filmmaker. And, you know, I watched a lot of videos and how to do stuff, and then just experiment and see what looked good and everything. But, you know, I've been doing it now for a fairly long time, you know, at least 7, 8 years, and, you know, have done quite a bit. You know, I feel, you know, one of the great things, and I don't know about you, is like every time that I make something, I feel like I learn something and I get better and I'm excited about the next thing, because I always feel like I'm going to make something cooler the next time. Do you feel that way?
Oh,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every film is a huge learning curve.
yeah.
And, you know, and one of the great things, you know, and I'm actually jealous about you two is in the sense that, you know, I do most of my films by myself.
Yeah.
You know, I do all the shooting and the editing, flying the drones, picking out the music, putting everything together, and which is great. And that's, I think, generally why I tend to keep my films shorter, because it's just a lot of work when you're making a film that's an hour and 20 minutes long and you're doing it all by yourself. That can be a lot of, you know, a lot of work. And so it is really nice that you guys work together, and it makes that process a little easier. That's certainly one thing as independent filmmaker. You know, I have worked with other folks in the business, but I would love to eventually find someone that I can work with a little more. And I know we've talked in the past about doing some stuff, but again, we all work, we have full-time schedules, and it's difficult, and especially right now during the pandemic. So that's kind of basically how I got into film. I actually used to really watch a lot of films as a kid. You know, I used to watch narrative films just because that was what was available to me as a kid. And then as the older I got, I started watching more documentaries and learning about documentaries and enjoying them, and really getting into the fact that I was being entertained but learning something at the same time. And that's what I really like about documentary films is, you know, there is that ability to be creative and use all the talents and everything that you have to make something really nice and enjoyable to watch, but also to educate and entertain people, and so that they learn about something. I mean, that's one thing with documentaries, is just to sometimes get people interested in things that they're either super not familiar with, or it's just a story that it should be told, but they haven't heard of it yet. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of basically where I was at. All right, so we'll move on to the next question, just in that sense, and you know, and talking about stories at the last section there. You know, where do you find stories, or is, you know, to talk about some of your films? I mean, I know you haven't done a huge amount of films, neither have I, but you know, there's always an impetus. There's something there that, you know, triggers you to want to make a film. And how do you go about that? What is your process?
Interesting. I mean, I think, you know, they always say that like 90% of making a film is a documentary film is having access to the subject matter.
Yeah.
And that's one of the limits I have found. You know, I may want to do a film on a subject that I'm just not going to ever get the access to, you know, maybe somebody who's famous or whatever. But so doing things that are accessible. And for us, it's been, you know, where I teach. 2 of our films have to do with Franklin Pierce University. The first one was its 50th anniversary. The president came to us actually and knew that we were starting to work, you know, become documentary filmmakers, and he wanted to have a film about the first 50 years of the school as part of the anniversary. So we were commissioned. Our first film was a commissioned film, which was great. Which was lucky, yeah. And which was very nice. And so that film came to us that way, that subject matter. And then the one we're working on now has to do with following a study abroad trip that we run at the university on this old pilgrimage route in Spain called the Camino de Santiago. We've been running trips we've run 4 trips so far over the last decade. And the last one was in 2017. And we talked during the first 3 years about always wanting to do a film on it. And we finally brought equipment.
And how could we shoot this film while we're leading the trip and carrying everything we need in a backpack?
Yeah.
Plus your camera equipment.
It was and one of the great ideas, Laurie actually came up with this before we went, is we took our own camera to film it, but we gave all the students a small little flip camera to record like video diaries. So when they were alone and not with us, this is separate from our interviews that we did with them along the way. You know, we got some intimate kinds of reflections from the students throughout the trip, and so that was kind of cool. They're really important parts of the film as we're putting it together now. And the other big film we worked on was again really connected to where I work at Franklin Pierce. It was called From Hurricane to Climate Change. And we worked on that with a whole team of faculty colleagues, and that did a lot of work. I think we spent about 3 years in the making of the film, and it was a project of what was called at that time the Monadnock Institute of Nature, Place, and Culture, and that It started out
very different than how it ended up.
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but where you start out thinking you're going to make one film and we ended up making a different one, or we added a lot to it. The first idea was to do a film on the 1938 hurricane, great hurricane that came through New England, and did particular damage in the Monadnock region, and especially in Peterborough. And there were 4 people who lived through that as children who were interested in telling the story, and we wanted to capture that. And we did that at the Peterborough Historical Society. And then we found that the Historical Society had actual archival footage they had never digitized.
I've seen the film, and it's a great film, and I encourage everyone to see it. But that was one of the best things that I really enjoyed about the film. I mean, it's a great story, but actually seeing historical footage of that is really, really interesting.
And I think that partly is why the Monadnock Institute got interested in doing it. When we saw that those great archival films and still pictures, we knew we had a good film we could do. But
And we were able to interview people that
yes, that
lived through that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, so what you're saying more or less, and I would agree with you, and I the same thing. It's access and kind of what's in front of you and what's you're able to do is really how you get your stories. And I would say that's pretty much where I'm at too. And I have to agree, access is so key. And with the types of films that I've made about farming, actually being able to get out onto all these farms and be able to tromp around and fly my drone wherever I want, that's really key to get, the right look and the feel of the place that you're trying to capture. And especially, with Thirst, the film that I did about Branch and Blade, the two owners, Trevor and Jesse, were awesome. They just let me hang out in the brewery, with my equipment and, try not to get in their way while they're making beer. But they were really, really good about that. And that's really what's key is you're right. I mean, because it's a boring documentary if it's all talking heads and there's no good B-roll.
Yes.
I agree.
Exactly. All right. So there's a question here. So excuse me while I quickly, it says, maybe I can read it. No, I guess I need my glasses. What's the longest you've worked on a film? You sometimes hear from filmmakers that it took years to complete a film, 7 to 10 years. Are shorter docs and narrative easier to finish in several months or a few years? How does budget factor in deciding or tell a story, and how long you'll commit to working on the story? All right, well, there's a lot of questions there. But you have talked about, I think your case is a little different than me. You've worked years on a project before, right? You're in the middle of a project that you've been working years on.
Yeah.
But not 7 to 10 years. That would seem like a long time. However, I do know that in Monif, a lot of the films, sometimes the films that we showcase, some of these films are films that people have even longer than that. Last year there was a film that we showed about a healer. I think he was in Bali. I think it was called Bali Healer, or he was in Bali, and he was a gentleman who, people went to him to get fixed for all kinds of ailments and everything. And this one individual lived in Bali and filmed him over the years and created this documentary, but he had shot this documentary for like 20 years. And so the film went from this guy being a really young man to being really energetic and helping a lot of people to 20 years later having a stroke and really being helpless himself. And so it was, an interesting arc, but it was a 20-year arc. And so, I myself, when I make stuff, again, I'm making shorter things, 10, 12, 15 minutes. Hidden in Plain Sight was a little longer. That was a little different project. But generally the things that I make are a little shorter. And those do only take me 3 months to make, generally, because I don't want to, pre-pandemic, I was just thinking I was going to make a project, spend 3-4 months on it, and then move on to something else. And, and so I was thinking of more of a series of local documentaries, Locally Rooted was kind of the first one. Thirst was the second one. And then all of a sudden I ran into the wall of the pandemic. So I do, but I'm at the whim also of having a full-time job and trying to work around that. So, I shoot on weekends and take too long a lunch break sometimes.
Greg, how long did it take to make your first film, Hidden in Plain Sight? That
took really, that took probably 8-9 months. And, because I interviewed about 20 people for that film. And that's really, I think, what takes a long time. And I only used 8 people. And, it's funny, at the time you interview folks and you think you're getting some great stuff. And then you watch it later and you're like, I'm not sure if that's where I want to go. Maybe it's something different. It's not bad, but it's not. And so, yeah, it can take a while. And plus, as I said earlier, I wasn't quite familiar what I was doing at that point. I didn't have the experience. And so it took a lot longer for me to kind of figure things out.
Mhm.
You know, it was like the first time I actually used Final Cut Pro 10. And so I didn't really understand. I was only
Right.
basic. I mean,
Right.
it's a busy program.
Learning as you're going.
Laura, you're an editor. I mean, you know how like Premiere Pro and all these editing software programs can be. Takes a while to figure out how
It does take a while.
Yeah.
to use them effectively, for
But
sure.
it's- Yeah,
I mean,
editing.
especially when you're trying to learn it yourself. I think
Exactly.
we started, you know, you took classes with a professional editor up at Maine Media.
Right, right, and
Which-
that was a
yeah.
huge help.
Do
I
you
felt
use
that.
Premiere Pro? Do you use Final Cut Pro?
I'm switching over
Yeah.
now to Premiere.
Premiere. Use
But
Final
we
Cut Pro.
started on
We started on
Final
Final
Cut,
Cut.
yeah.
And Doug has switched over completely to Premiere. And now I'm just starting to get my hands on that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I just only experimented a little bit with it. You know, I kind of started on Final Cut Pro and I like it and it's good, but I also I know some folks who use Premiere Pro like you, and it has a little better plugins, a few other things that you can use with it. There's some more applications. But I have a Mac computer and stuff, and so
Mhm.
that's kind of why I did it. The other part, I'm sorry, go ahead. Doug.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I think part of the question had to do with funding films and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was just getting into. She says, how much budget factor
Yeah.
into deciding to tell a story and how long you'll commit to working on the story?
Yeah.
Good question.
That is a good question. I mean, I think in a way, if we love the topic and have access to it, we're going to try and make it happen somehow.
Mhm. Yeah.
Funding it out of our own time and some of our own money. But I think the funding we have gotten has been related to my Franklin Pierce, faculty development funds. We've used that to buy some equipment, to pay for music rights. We actually, on our first film, we commissioned a soundtrack. We have, Laurie had a real good friend from down here in the Valley who is a film music producer himself out in Hollywood. And since he was a friend of Laurie's,
Gave you a good
that was
price.
the
hopefully.
deal.
Yes,
Yeah.
we got, it was very helpful.
Yeah, but some funding from the school has helped on all our projects, and the Hurricane to Climate Change film had funding from the New Hampshire Humanities Council and from a foundation in Keene, the Putnam Foundation. Small
Right.
small grants.
Yeah. As an example, in that film, like what was, what was the budget of that film or close to it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Do you know?
The hurricane, and because that was the one we spent the most money on. We actually had it professionally color graded, and that took us, I think that was about a $5,000 task. I think we spent about $20,000 on that film,
On that one.
and it came from the grants from the Humanities Council, the Putnam Foundation, from Franklin Pierce, and we had a private donor too. So yeah.
And the other films have been less than that.
Our other films have been less. Yes, more like about $5,000 or. Actually, the one commissioned by the school probably was, that was in the $20,000 range too.
Yeah, I'll say for myself and my films, I I don't really have a budget, in the sense, the budget is me. I mean, everything is my own money. So, again, I have, I've spent I have equipment and a few things, so, you know, I don't need to rent things or spend money that way. You know, one of the great things about making documentaries is you can work by yourself. You don't need a staff. And so that's kind of the way I work. And so that's, at least it is encouraging, I think, at least to other folks. I mean, you know, I'm jealous of you guys having $20,000 to work with. That's awesome. And, but sometimes that's not the case. And if not, there still is the opportunity to make something decent and really good without having a huge amount of budget. I mean, I say I spend everything, like, I think locally rooted, $1,500.
Yeah.
You know, maybe Thirst was a little less, maybe $1,000. You know, of gas, food, whatever expense, batteries for the digital recorder, something, you know, like that. Maybe buying a piece of equipment that I didn't have, I need, but nothing major. But yeah, not much more than that generally. You know, but it can be easy to spend money quickly. I can see how that can get out of hand, you know, without too much of a problem, especially once you start adding other people into the mix.
Right.
Definitely. All right, well, good. Well, okay, cool. Looks like we answered that question, I think, hopefully. And thank you for the question. Appreciate it. If you have another one, you know, let us know and we'll move on. Yeah, so we were talking about stories, and I guess, yeah, we got to that. I mean, yeah, I think the best thing to do if people are looking, you know, to do local documentaries, you know, start small, find a good local story. Don't overreach. You don't need to. I mean, if it's a good story, that's really what counts. You know, that's the entertaining part. You don't need a huge budget or awesome cameras if it's a good story, for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. In talking, the next question is kind of like your workflow, in the sense of, you know, of how, you know, if you're making a documentary, like, you know, do you write stuff down? Do you have a storyboard? Do you have just an outline? Do you just go out and shoot stuff and then figure it out later? You know, I mean, you do the editing, I guess, Laurie. Douglas does mostly the filming, but, you know, how do you guys work?
Yeah. We kind of go out and shoot. We depending on it. For instance, when we were shooting on the Camino de Santiago with the students, that was on the fly, and we would take time every day Doug would hold a selfie stick while we're walking with our backpacks on, and we would just discuss what had been going on for the last day. And we did that almost daily. And in a way, it was sort of like a narration of what was happening. So that we
blogging almost.
That ended up being some of the narration in the film.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Without it being a talking head, it's actually us walking along, discussing maybe something that.
But we do put a lot of time into thinking about what the story is and how to shoot it. I wouldn't say formally sitting down and storyboarding anything, although, I've never really storyboarded. But I have thought through the kind of shots that we want to get on various films. And when it came to the Franklin Pierce and the Hurricane to Climate Change, since we were, had funders that wanted to know, what we planned to do, we wrote actual treatments of the film, what we thought the story was going to be, and the look and feel of it, and that we were going to go for, and I spent a lot of time on that. And when I was working on the Hurricane to Climate Change film, we did a lot of that with a whole group of colleagues. We met pretty regularly for a couple of years, and we were constantly going over what the story was going to be, because it changed. As I said, it started out being a hurricane film about the hurricane in '38, but then we realized that was kind of a short film. That ended up being the DVD extra.
Oh, really?
And then what we did is we realized that they solved that problem of continuous flooding in Peterborough, where these two rivers come together. by building a flood control dam, the McDowell Reservoir.
Right.
And a lot of flood control dams were being built at that time in the late 40s and 50s. And so
The Army
that
Corps
was
of
sort of
Engineers.
the end of that story. And Laurie, I think, played a big role in making the film take on a different topic, because you know, she suggested when we were sort of in the middle of that, well, you know, why don't you do something that's more about today, you know, not so much the past.
Mhm.
And we realized the current weather related crisis and threat is from climate change. And you know, I shared that idea with our colleagues at Franklin Pierce, and they all were on board with, you know, we were off and running basically on trying to do something on climate change. And again, that's a huge topic, and we only have the wherewithal to do something locally. So we told the story of how climate change impacts the Monadnock region and what the towns around the region were doing to respond to climate change. And that became the focus of the film.
And then taking it a step further to maybe give some ideas of what people could do in their own lives, like maybe growing local foods. And
Right.
so it kind of covered the history and then the response currently, and then what can we do to work towards a future.
Yeah, because climate change films can be pretty dark.
And you know, like, and especially what we were talking about earlier in the sense of creating story and kind of localizing it and turning a broad issue like climate change into something that's actually accessible and manageable for local folks to see, and they can do something about it. That's great.
Yeah.
So now, Laurie, too. Now, Douglas, you mostly do the camera work, and Laurie, you do mostly the editing. Is that
actually we do both, really?
Okay.
Yeah. I edit as much, and Laurie has a really good eye. And
sometimes I'm just over his shoulder. And
that was the other question I was going to ask. I mean, since each of you do it like this, one person hover over the other person and go, "No, take another frame out of that."
I'm often like, wait. You cut that S off at the end of that word. Go back.
Cut to the eyes. Cut to the eyes. Right.
Yeah. Or you know, it is really helpful to have two people on a set, or you know, whatever you're shooting, because you know, you're paying attention to what you're shooting, and something very interesting is happening out of frame that the other person can see. And so we're often or my error often is I'm trying to get it all, and Laurie's telling me just stay on something, you know, stay still. You're gonna miss something really good.
You know, as being an editor myself, you know, editing a 10, 12, 15-minute project is considerably easier than editing an hour and a half long project. I would think in that sense, you're only doing 10, 15-minute sections and then kind of maybe putting things together. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah.
Yes.
You mean in terms of the editing work?
Yeah, just the editing process itself.
Absolutely.
And, you know, not getting too far behind yourself. And
I think all our films are like these little vignettes that are just pieced together.
Correct.
And so you edit one vignette at a time, you know,
and so you don't edit in, like, I don't generally edit. I mean, sometimes I do, but in sequential order. You're just like, because sometimes you're missing pieces, like maybe you don't have
Yeah. I think
do you edit before you have all the pieces? Let me put it that way.
What's that?
Do you edit before you have all the pieces?
Yes.
Start editing?
When we were shooting Hurricane to Climate Change, we didn't have all our interviews shot that eventually were part of the entire project.
Or you found at one point you needed someone to say something that was missing.
Yeah,
you had to go back and get another interview with someone to fill in a gap.
Yeah, the big thing in that film was our big challenge was, since it was sort of two films, you know, Hurricane to Climate Change, we didn't want to give the impression that the hurricane in 1938 was a result of climate change, because it was back then. Scientists, you know, And so we had to go back, we had to link those two stories together in a way and really have someone that we were interviewing. And we had a guy a climatologist at UNH who we had to film twice. And that was because the first time we didn't know that we needed to connect those two stories.
Right. Sure.
Carefully.
Right.
But yeah,
I think it depends on the project, really.
with our film now on the Camino study abroad trip, I mean, we started with everything done, shot, all the still photographs and the footage. Right now, as we're doing another version of the film and editing it, we have been talking about maybe it needs some narration. So we may put some of that in, and that we would record now,
And that film
Right.
is more cinema verite, though. So
Well,
that's the question: do we want to add
Yeah, that's our big question.
narration or not?
We really wanted to do a film that it would be in this verite tradition that was sort of follow something happening in time, as it unfolds. And it seemed like having a journey like that had a beginning, middle, and end would be a nice way to try and do that kind of film. So we're really debating right now whether to insert narration after the fact. All the narration in the film right now was shot while we were there, what we were in the middle of the whole, in the middle of the what was going on.
Interesting.
I think there's something wonderful about limiting yourself to only using that those materials. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting hearing, kind of your workflow and, with the way that I work it, I have ideas, but then a lot of times, I mean, I do, as being an independent filmmaker, I do kind of wing it a lot of the times and see what I'm going to see, like once I get access, that's almost like the first thing is like convincing these folks to give you access, and then get in there and see what you've got. And then instead of like having all these preconceived notions of a particular story or a particular way you want to go, because, I mean, we always have that, but I think every time I've gone into places, I never come out that it's not really what I'm thinking going in. And I always learn new things going in.
And isn't that like part of the joy of doing this kind of film making,
exactly, because we all have preconceived notions of certain things and what they're going to be like and everything. And but I'm always pleasantly surprised once I get inside. And so I don't really have a problem winging it. Now, once I get inside and get access and kind of figure out where I'm going, then I'll become a little more rigid. And, and again, I don't storyboard, but I do outline stuff and saying, okay, I kind of want to do this, 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 and this, and this. And as someone who likes a lot of B-roll, you've seen a lot of my films, love B-roll. So, I'm always like, I want to know what to shoot, kind of like, a lot of times too, I'll wait till I do interviews with people, then film B-roll.
Right.
Instead of like trying to think ahead of what's going to be important. Like, I want to hear what they think is important, and then watch the interview and going, okay, I need shots of this, I need shots of that, I need shots of this. But also not necessarily, I mean, I think one mistake people make is necessarily literally showing what's going on in the film when someone's talking about it. So I mean, you want to do that to a point, but not exactly. So I generally, in my workflow, that's how I get stuff. And I generally get everything before I start editing. I'll save editing for the last thing. I'm not quite sure why that's the case. But I usually will just, I've got an external hard drive, I put everything on there and I just let it sit and wait. And then finally, when I have all this stuff, I guess I feel like for myself, I don't want to be, once I start editing, I just want to keep editing. I want to have all the pieces there. I know from my job at the radio station is probably why, like in creating radio ads, I need the voice, I need the music, I need the sound effects. whatever it may be. I need everything all at once to make the commercial. And
Yeah.
I probably use the same theory, you know, in making film at the same time, at least with the way that I work in editing. I want everything, you know, in one spot.
I think that's an efficient way to
Yes.
do it.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
like when I first started out, I like one of the things I really resist is like naming all the clips in the
No.
Yeah, I
and
don't do that either.
well, actually,
Drives me crazy.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. People have different kind of workflows. I just use like the computer camera name. Oh, it's GoPro, blah, blah, or
Right.
Lumix, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Well, when you're making a bigger project, I
Yeah.
found when I was
Yeah.
doing the anniversary film on the college, I found like, you know, I was constantly trying to, I know I have a picture of this particular thing I'm looking for, and then I'd have to run through, you know, folders and folders of trying to find that thing. Had I named it right away, I could go to it quickly and pull it into the project.
So now I pretty much insist
Yeah.
that we go through and label clips
Yeah,
because
All of it.
it's on a long project. It's very time consuming to spend a lot of time looking for things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
To label it too. I mean, with the Camino film, I spent 2 months labeling
We
all our
sat.
clips and all our photos from
Yeah.
that trip.
You know, I will say I do the same thing, like, you know, to the general point of, you know, I'll put in folders the way that I work on my drive and say, okay, here are the interviews, here's the drone shots, here's B-roll, you know, or particular types. So I know, at least in that sense. And a lot of times too, which is a little time consuming, I'll even create a list of my shots, you know, and saying, okay, well, here's all the shots of, you know, farm X, and here's all the shots of, you know, farm B and whatever. So at least I know, because if I'm only making something 10, 12 minute long, you know, I really only have maybe, you know, I mean, I'm shooting 500 clips, but I'm only using 100,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, and so if I have it written down sometimes in places and I kind of categorize it, at least in saying, okay, this is, you know, whatever farm or whatever it is, it makes it a little easier for me sometimes to at least find stuff. But I sympathize. I mean, if you have 1,000 clips to look at.
We had 4,000 still photos.
Yeah.
And that's not counting the clips. I don't know. I didn't count up the clips.
Yeah, because you were saying you gave cameras to everybody, all the kids.
And we
Yes.
did that. We had to label all that too.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of
work.
Yeah. You know, and in talking about workflow and talking like, you know, I generally, what I shoot to what I use is usually about 10 to 1.
Mhm.
You know, I'll shoot, you know, really, if I need 100 shots, I got to shoot 1,000 shots sometimes, it seems like, to be happy with the 100 that I have. Is that similar to you?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, maybe not the ratio, but you're shooting a ton
A lot
of more
more.
stuff than you actually need.
That's
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. And sometimes it feels like we might need more.
Yeah, you know, I agree. I'm always feel like I'm compromising on a few B-roll clips of like, well, it's okay. I got to have something
Right.
and put it there. Yeah.
Right.
So, all right. Well, cool. That's interesting. You know, and one thing we talked about in the pre-show is you know, with the pandemic going on and COVID-19, and is that being an independent filmmaker, there's a little more opportunity now because of the closure of theaters and big studios not spending 100, 150, 200 million dollars on a project. That, you know, like the last film Tenet, you know, really they tried putting it out. It cost $200 million to make. This is a Chris Nolan film. And, you know, the opening weekend, they sold like $9 million worth of tickets. And so it was kind of a reality check for major studios that the model is changing now. And I do believe, and I'm just interested to hear your take on this, that there's a short window for independent filmmakers now, you know, to get a little more attention than they normally would. I mean, usually at film festivals and other things, people don't realize that even places, people like National Geographic and PBS and other places, they're making documentaries, and that theoretically smaller independent folks are competing with those large corporations to get their films seen by other places. And, you know, they have a budget, they look better, they're slicker, they can hire Morgan Freeman to do their voiceover, you know, whatever. And, you know, I just think now is the time, if you're a filmmaker and you're an independent filmmaker, is to really think about, you know, how you can make stuff that is going to be seen. You know, you have to think too big, but I think it's a great time for smaller independent filmmakers right now to get at least their talents out there, see people see, so you can move up the ladder, so to speak. Because the old days of, you know, you made films, you put it in film festivals, and you worked your way up from whatever to Sundance, and people saw your film and they paid you, and that was kind of the old formula. But that doesn't, I can't see that being the case anymore. Do you?
Well, I think you know more about that than I do, Greg. I'm glad to hear there seems to be a window for the independent small producer. Yeah, I'm not so familiar with the model. I mean, we have spent our time like trying to produce these films, but getting them out in the world is another whole skill set. And you know, I guess I don't know a lot about that, except to, you know, the traditional route, which is to try and get them into film festivals and think about how to screen them locally. That's where we've been. But you know, all these streaming platforms now, there are sort of third-party companies springing up to help you get your stuff on YouTube, or not YouTube, but onto Netflix and Hulu and some of these streaming platforms, and get paid a little bit for them. I've looked into it a little bit. It seems kind of reasonable. You know, they have a fee that they charge.
Yeah, it's you know, yeah, you can do it. I mean, if you have something that's pretty good,
Yeah,
and it's shot correctly, you know, the way Netflix, I say that the way Netflix wants it, not the way you want it, but you know, they always have a certain camera you have to use and right length and all that good stuff. But if it fits the parameters,
yeah,
you know, it's worth it. Sometimes these distributors, I mean, sure, you're paying 30-40% to them of the cut, whatever, but at least you're getting stuff out, and it's getting seen, and it gives you opportunities, hopefully, to do things down the road.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Look forward to we. You know, the first two films are now on YouTube. You know, they were made in 2012 and 2016, and but this one that's coming up on our Camino trip, we hope to get sort of seen more widely. And there is a whole community of people who love the Camino, have walked it from all over the world, and there are several Facebook groups, and you know, getting the word out through those kind of social media outlets helps you to get your film an audience, and that's what distributors want to know. Do you have, what kind of audience is there for the film? So I guess we'll learn as we go. You know, that's the thing about us small scale, you know, independent filmmakers. We're learning as we go.
Yep.
And trying to do it around full-time jobs.
Right.
Yeah,
Something we love, you know.
it's really difficult. Yeah, I agree, and I know I've been thinking about changing my philosophy a little bit, because I was going the traditional route, and you know, I do have to say, though, it is nice in the sense of, you know, I've been in some film festivals in other parts of the country, in the western part of the country, which would be really difficult to travel to. But now with virtual film festivals, you know, you're able to, you know, just sit home and watch all the films that are in this film festival, and that's actually really enjoyable. And I think that helps out with smaller filmmakers too. I think film, as long as you're willing to let your film be shown virtually online, amazingly, there are distributors that don't want that still. And so there's room for smaller films to be shown at some pretty good film festivals. So don't be discouraged.
Yeah.
You know, in sending them in.
Yep. And,
A couple quick questions too that I have, and then because we're getting about an hour, and I don't see any other questions right now to wrap it up. But one question I wanted to ask you is just quickly. I know a lot of young filmmakers and stuff are interested in equipment and what equipment we use and what equipment we have and what software we use. And I know you and I pre-COVID had lunch at Elm City, and we had talked about you buying a snazzy new camera, and I was wondering if you had bought a snazzy new camera.
no, we haven't bought that snazzy camera yet. We have rented it a couple of times.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But
What's your main shooting camera?
what's that?
What's your main shooting camera now?
Well, we got into all this at the time when the DSLR revolution was taking place in filmmaking, which made it possible to shoot really high quality video on these rather inexpensive cameras. Like we have used the Canon 5D Mark II is what much of our work has been on. We'd like to upgrade that to a Mark IV, or maybe even get something a little bit better, a cinema actual video
like
camera.
a Canon EOS 300.
Yeah, exactly. That would be.
Yeah, those are nice cameras, I would say, but they're like $8,000 for the body.
Yeah, the newest one is 11,000, I think, just for the body.
Well, we'll put that on the wish list.
And so, yeah, a nice chunk of EF glass on that. Had another $10,000.
The film we shot on the Camino, we had to go light, so we used a small little pocket Sony camera that shot HD video and did a great job.
Yeah.
But
ideally, we would have had a whole film crew behind us carrying everything and shooting it, but
no budget.
Yeah, and so Laurie, in editing, you generally you said you use Premiere Pro.
Yeah.
And so obviously you're at a PC-based computer with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for sound equipment, do you use wireless? Do you use boom mics? Do you use lavalier? Wired stuff with digital recorders?
We started out the first films. We were doing all boom and lavalier, some lavalier
and the
stuff,
Zoom
and a Zoom recorder.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we are using a wireless mic a lot of the time, but on those the Camino film was just a small little mic that was attached to the Sony, a little shotgun mic, yeah.
Yeah, so you're just catching, whatever you can for
or a wired lav for interviews. But yeah. How about you?
Well, I have a couple. My main shooting camera is a GH4 Lumix GH4 that I use.
By the way, your footage looks beautiful, on your films.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And
out of that camera.
And it's the GH4 is an older camera. It's not quite as old as the Mark II, but it does shoot in 4K, which I really like to shoot in 4K. It has a micro Four Thirds sensor, but it is really crisp and it looks good. And I use cinema lenses. I don't use, I do have a good Panasonic lens that came with the camera initially, but I moved to cinema lens, and so they're prime lenses, but they really make a huge difference, in the shots. So I have that. I also have a Mavic 2 drone that I shoot with because, especially farms, and I've done a lot of outdoor stuff. And drones, I love drones. I've been flying them for years, and it's just a great way. I use a lot of times drones as establishing shots and transition shots in films. If you've noticed that, I'm going from one thing to another, and drones are a great way, instead of a cross dissolve or some funky thing, using a drone shot to move across. I always think that's nice, and people, as long as it's not too long, people like.
Yeah, that's one of the ways the filmmaking has changed recently. When we did our first one on the Franklin Pierce.
That's right.
We actually had to hire a helicopter to get some over.
Some aerial shots. That must have been cheap.
That was not cheap.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, a helicopter flying over here.
But yeah,
and it was probably crappy, shaky.
Yeah, you know, it was tough.
Shot in SD, all out of focus.
It was SD. They were pretty professional.
Yeah.
They had a gyroscopic sort of sling that they put the camera in, which really helped stabilize.
Interesting. Yeah, time has.
It was interesting to go up in the helicopter with them.
Did you fly around?
I was the director. I was directing.
Told them where to go. Yeah.
We hired a cameraman and a helicopter pilot, and I went up for the ride to kind of tell them what kind of shots I wanted.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's
was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that's really braver probably than I would be wanted. I don't know, in a helicopter. I'm not sure. Yeah, you know, I also use, I have a couple GoPros that I use. I find those really good for, like, especially the brewery. Those were great shots for the brewery. I didn't use the GoPro that much for locally rooted, being outside. You know, GoPros generally are bad landscape style, wider shots. And the new GoPros are really good. They shoot in linear mode, so you don't have the fisheye effect.
Right. And
you can easily shoot in 4K, 60 frames per second. And so with GoPros, that's usually what I do. And it allows me, if I want to use slow-mo on those. And so if you go from 60 to 24 frames per second, that's like a perfect just speed that is slow enough that everybody can see everything and is nice. Oh, we have another question.
Oh.
When will the Camino film be finished?
Well, I have a break over winter break between my 2 semesters of teaching coming up, and we have set a goal to finish it by February.
Yes.
And then try to get it out into the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And then the only thing I'd say, like, the equipment that I have is I have a, whatever it is, I have a shotgun mic, and I have a wired lavalier. I did just buy, Rode has just come out with this really interesting wireless kind of set. It's called the Go system. And what they are is this is what the box looks like. Wireless Go.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But anyway, they're just tiny little boxes of small little pieces. There's a transmitter and a receiver. And this, I think, is really ingenious, because what they have is, this is how small they are. So they're one's a transmitter and one's a receiver. And what they do is, the receiver has a clip on the back, and so does the transmitter, but the clips fit a hot shoe. So you just put it into a hot shoe of a camera. It has a 3.5 mic that you can put into a camera or a digital recorder. And then the microphone, you just clip on to someone's lip like a regular thing, and you can turn it inside. That's what I've used it a few times, and you can turn it in. So it's barely visible. I don't have the right shirt on, kind of, but, and so then you can follow people around.
That's great.
And it's really convenient. It works on a wireless system rather than a frequency, so you don't get interference like you would with some traditional wireless microphones.
Yeah.
And so they're $200. I mean, and you can use 8 of them up to a time. They won't interfere with each other.
Wow.
So,
that's great.
So it's really, the technology is really interesting. And so I just got that a few months ago, and I'm really excited. That's kind of my new, because I do have wired lavaliers and they sound great.
Yeah.
I have a really nice Sony balanced lavalier mic that I use for interviews, and in certain situations, it sounds so sweet, and it's everything. But there are times when I really wanted a wireless, where I was following somebody around, and wires are really just a pain to do that. So yeah, I mean, that's the equipment that I have. But I will say to folks who are watching that are interested in filmmaking, is one thing I learned is that it's, as we mentioned earlier, it's the story. Don't worry about your equipment so much, and you want a camera. All cameras are good now. I mean, there's so much good equipment that doesn't cost a lot of money. Don't fret over spending a huge amount of money. We're at the point in our careers where, we've been making films and everything. So you know, we're impatient. We do want to buy better equipment, you know, to that point. But I know from all the equipment that I have right now, the GH4 and everything, for me to take that next level, you know, is going from, you know, from a $2,000 camera to, yeah, like what you were talking about, $15,000. And so for me, I'm really happy. I mean, it's the equipment that I have and the things that I make look great. I don't really need anything.
It's true.
And if you're making stuff, I mean, you know, even just like the Canon series, I mean, Sony makes great, I mean, mirrorless cameras. I certainly suggest going mirrorless for sure, just because it's easier, it's smaller, and it's easier to work with. And usually it seems like mirrorless, you can get 4K 60, you know, get a little bigger sensor, more bang for your buck. But I mean, whatever you're comfortable with, if you've been shooting, you know, DSLRs for a long time, if that's what you want to use, those are great. Like you're saying, I mean, the video capabilities of those cameras are awesome. And with some good editing software, you can make stuff look great. There's certainly no doubt about that. So is there anything else you guys wanted to add? I mean, you know, we've been here, it's been about an hour now, and so we should probably wrap it up. And, but is there anything else, you know, you guys wanted to add about filmmaking or anything you can think of, or you're filmmaked out?
No,
Never.
Never. Good answer.
it's been inspiring to talk about it, you know, today, and I appreciate the festival, you know, organizing this panel. And
Yes.
want to thank the Monadnock International Film Festival and Dee Fitzgerald and you, Greg, for organizing it.
Well, I just want to say again, yeah, thanks to you guys, you know, for being part of this. I know you didn't have a film in Monmouth this year. Did you have a film in Monmouth?
No, not this year. Because we were hoping to get the Camino film edited in time, but didn't.
But next year, it should be ready,
Yes.
and give an opportunity for people to see it.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you so much, though, for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
On Saturday. And again, thanks Dee for all the help that she does. And thanks to watchers too for joining us today on your Saturday. We really appreciate it. And you got a few hours left, so watch the films for the festival that are there that you can. And thank you for everyone for your support with the film festival. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.